Hi, welcome to the Bathtub, where when you hear this music, and it stops really quick so we don't get sued, and you imagine we have a whiteboard on which the words pointless and meaningless have been written, but I was too lazy to carry it all the way up from the basement, from the garage, then you know it's another episode of Pointless Adventures in Literature. This is the acme of our literary endeavors here at the Bathtub, where we don't just talk about aimlessly about books that we like reading in the bathtub, but we actually tell pointless stories about our life in the world of literature. Today, again, we promise that the stories are always pointless or meaningless, or pointless and meaningless, but they're always pointless, meaningless, or both, and that's the promise that we give you here at the Bathtub every week when we tell this stupid story. Today, it's going to be even more aimless and self-contradictory as normal. One of the things we try to do here, we try not to do here. Basically, what we do in this show is just not do things. Is we try not to be correct about anything. We make lots of mistakes. I'm glad when people correct stuff on the videos and stuff, because I don't really have the time to go correct all the incredible numbers of mistakes I make and points of misinformation. We hope that you accept these stories as what they are, which is just ramblings of somebody who likes to read books. And occasionally I try to throw in a bit of information. Half the time it's inaccurate. So today what we're going to talk about, and what I would have written on the board, is this is banned books in the bathtub. So we're going to talk about books that are banned in the bathtub. And you know about all these horrific books that have kind of destroyed the lives of our children for years. Books like all those books that were banned in various states and various libraries throughout the world, such as Huckleberry Finn, or all the books people like to read, usually were banned at some time. And Catcher in the Rye, of course, and To Kill a Mockingbird. Those are the ones always trotted out as the banned books that we were all supposed to love. Slaughterhouse-Five, I guess, was banned. But, a lot of other books get banned, and they're not quite so easy to deal with. And I thought we'd talk a little bit about that today. We have an extra big Manhattan today because I'm extra confused about what I want to talk about. I just know I'm kind of a little fed up about stuff. And I thought I'd start off with this book here. I don't want to seem like one of those right-wing nuts, okay, on TV, but this is called If I Ran the Zoo. You've probably read a lot about this in the newspapers. When I was a kid, this was my favorite children's book. And I used to read this to my son all the time. I've read it to children all my life, and I love this book. And I still enjoy reading it. And a few months ago, as you know, the Dr. Seuss estate said that they were never going to, they were going to stop printing this book. And it was decided because there was one picture, as I recall, one picture that they thought was offensive to a race, basically to Asian people, and they didn't want the Seuss estate to be reprinting these books. So there were several books, and the top of the list was my favorite book of Dr. Seuss, which I grew up loving. So I didn't know that I loved a book that was filled with hate mongering. Here's a picture that was not is not shown. This is not. I'm really nervous about doing this show because I don't want it to be sliced up and thrown off the web, and I'll tell you why in a minute. This is one of the panels about the Russians. So this is a crazy picture of what Russians look like in a story. It says, and speaking of birds, there's the Russian Palusky. There's the Russian Palusky, whose headski is redsky and belly is bluesky. I'll get one of them for my Zewski Magruski. So you'd always read this to the kids and you let them see the picture, and then you go look at all the different funny pictures. Okay, so that's, I guess, not an offensive piece. But as a result, this book was it was not banned. It was not published anymore by the Seuss estate. I'm sure you've heard all sorts of crazy. The right wing loves to talk about this, and I'm sure that they may actually probably make a couple of good points along the way. Now, the reason I bring this one up first is that so the Seuss estate decided not to publish it. That's their decision. They can do what they want to do. But when I found out about this, I heard that they were selling these books on eBay for a lot of money. And I sell a lot of books on eBay because I've got nothing else to do all day. And so I put my copy. I tried to put my copy about a few days after this furore had hit the fan. I tried to put my copy of If I Ran the Zoo on and try to get some money for it. But automatically, my listing was rejected. And I was sent to a page of about 4 or 5 computer screens full of explanations about hate crime and violent imagery and child abuse imagery on the net, and it had been automatically linked by eBay with this panoply of horrors that could occur if you let your child wander off into the carnival or something. It was just nothing but horrors, and I couldn't list it. So I got the book and I'll keep it, I guess. So that was the first time. I almost thought of doing a talk about how incredibly stupid this was on this thing, but I didn't want to get involved with it. And it looks like, all the bots in the computer world are like tagging if I ran the zoo. And one of the things I'm worried about is by talking about it on this show, they'll immediately zero in. This whole episode will be covered over in, graffiti and child abuse warnings. And I just wanted to say that I used to love that book, and I'm sorry that there's one of the pictures is offensive to people. I can sort of understand that, and at the same time, it's still a book I really remember reading. Now, reading and loving. One of the things we all know as readers in the bathtub, and we don't learn this in college. They never teach you this in college. But in the bathtub, we don't really care if the writer was kind of an asshole or not. I mean, right? There's a lot of writers, and a lot of them are assholes, and sometimes they're really nice people, and they're not very good writers. And I often think of it. I used to kid about it with my students about plumbers. If my plumber is supports Hitler and he's a really good plumber, I might let him still do the plumbing in my house if the really good plumber in town, even if he's a Chomsky reader and he never gets the job done, I would probably hire the plumber who could get the job done. Some writers are, and also the other thing is that writers, of course, by their very nature, are often iconoclasts, isolated, rejects from society. I speak from personal experience from all three of those positions in society, and writers are kind of oddballs, and they're not necessarily they're not always nice people. Most writers are nice people, I think, but there's a lot of nutty people out there. I thought I'd just remind everybody about some of the nutty people that are out there. One of my favorite writers is George Simenon. We talk about him all the time. I really like his intimate memoirs. I have all his books. I read him all the time. We talk about him in the bathtub. I think he was kind of a wonderful writer. If you read his intimate memoirs, they're pretty frank, they're pretty straightforward, and he's kind of an asshole. He's kind of a total asshole. I mean, his whole thing is sleeping with thousands of women. He spends a lot of time going to whorehouses and bordellos, and he's constantly talking about all these, his little adventures here and there, and sleeping with this person, that person, and bringing one girlfriend home to live with his wife, and the wife is somehow disturbed when he brings this woman home to live with him, who he's sleeping with, and he just kind of barrels along in this kind of randy, psychopathic behavior, and then he writes about he writes really well. He's a really good writer, and he's kind of a brilliant writer. But today, if this guy was around, his books, he would definitely have been outed. He would have been gone forever. No one would ever even know his stuff existed. They wouldn't let his books be published. Okay, I think you should still read them. Charles Dickens. I just realized I don't have Oliver Twist, but he was often accused of being anti-Semitic. I don't know if it's fair with Dickens. I'm not an expert. I cannot say. He was accused of because of his portrayal of Fagin, his creation of Fagin in Oliver Twist, and later in life he felt bad about it, so he created a sort of Jewish character. I remember in this book, Our Mutual Friend, to make up for it. He wanted to show a sympathetic Jewish man, and I don't remember it well enough to tell you about it. Again, don't quote anything on this, but I still think Dickens is a great writer. Okay, Ezra Pound. Ezra Pound was very supportive of Hitler and the Nazis. He really thought they were kind of a good group. He thought they were going to solve a lot of problems. And he wrote a lot of stuff he was embarrassed about later, and I don't know if he was embarrassed enough about them. But I've never been a big Ezra Pound fan, but at the same time, many people do love his work, and he's very important to a lot of poets. So fine, I don't mind that. And at the same time, he was sympathetic of the fascists. At the same time, there was P.G. Woodhouse. Many of you know this. And P.G. Woodhouse he was in France somewhere, and the Nazis took over this place he was in, and they enlisted him to do a daily or weekly radio show on their radio armed forces. He never espoused support for the Nazis, but he got along with them. He was have dinner with them and chatting, and he would do the radio shows. And he was castigated by the British for years for many years. And one of my few heroes, one of my few literary review heroes, was always Orwell. I love his essays, and he's one of the few essayists and literary essayists I love. And he wrote a wonderful defense of P.G. Woodhouse, saying, you can't. This is a guy that didn't understand politics. Maybe. I think you could pretty much say the same about Pound. I think he misunderstood a lot about the world of politics, but at the same time, they both made these mistakes for which they could be said, okay, never read him. You should never read these people. And I think you would lose something if you didn't read them. Okay, here's another one. My friend Tom Dish, I used to love Tom Dish, used to write, he wrote a chapter in one of his books called Our Embarrassing Ancestor, Edgar Allan Poe. It's one of my favorite chapter titles. Edgar Allan Poe was an asshole. He was another asshole. And I don't think Dr. Seuss was an asshole, by the way. I'm just saying that there's a lot of people in our literary history who were assholes. He was a real racist, and he wasn't just a racist against blacks. He was a racist against the common man. And he has a famous story called The Man in the Crowd, which is basically the stupidity of the average person. And the average person for him was an idiot, and they were kind of an animal. And when you talk about the black, and you go in one of his weirdest books, The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym, you go in the middle of the earth and it's filled with all these black people, and they're just animals. Basically, he saw that nature in black people as kind of the nature of the common person, only they were at their worst in blacks. He was a racist. He came from kind of a horrible background in a family. He never kind of repented of most of his ideas, and yet he was still kind of a brilliant writer and a disturbing writer and a kind of brilliant theorist in many ways. Now, should we still read him? I guess you kind of got to keep reading him. You can't really just not read him. You can't just stop publishing his books because he said all these horrible things. But you should acknowledge that he did horrible things. Naked Lunch. Okay. I was thinking about Norman Mailer in this, because Norman Mailer writes the intro. He was one of the people who helped get Burroughs back. I do not like Norman Mailer or William Burroughs. I can't read either of them. I don't think they should be banned. They should never be banned. I think Norman Mailer should not be read because he's boring. I think he can't write an interesting book. Burroughs was actually a kind of brilliant sentence writer. He writes kind of brilliant passages and really unusual passages. This book is I've tried reading it a few times. I've gotten most of the way through a couple of times. I can't read it. I find it really, it's sadistic. It's violent. I know a lot of people who love this book and think it's a really important American novel. Great. I think they should take it to the bathtub and teach it to their students and try to pass on what they think they love about it. I mean, there's the scene that I always remember most vividly is there's a horrible scene where a young boy is being hung. He's being hung. And somebody else, I think they're having sex with his body as he dies. Okay, great fun. Burroughs said he was doing a satire on capital punishment. Okay, maybe it's just a crazy delusion. But, what it is up to the readers, and I think they have to decide themselves. I mean, in the same sense that some people think de Sade was an important writer, or Octave Mirbeau, the guy who wrote another book I really couldn't finish. It's so filled with sadism and violence. One of our bathing buddies was talking about recently the Torture Garden. Okay, some of us don't want to read it, some of us do. You can't just stop. You just can't pretend the book doesn't exist and just throw it away. Philip K. Dick. I like Philip K. Dick's books. I think he's quite an interesting writer. He was not a perfect human being, from what I could tell. I know a lot of people who knew him and they liked him, and he was a total pain in the ass. He actually, my friend Tom Dish, I believe, as I recall, I think he actually sent the FBI after Tom, and Tom was always trying to help Phil Dick, and he understood the guy had problems. Philip K. Dick was one of the first people to start showing up at abortion clinics and threatening people and saying they're killing unborn babies and so forth. And the other thing I've always found, there's something else about it. Oh, he was also, this was my experience in the brief time I spent with him and Gus Hosford, he was also really avidly one of those people who kind of believed in that the Nazi Holocaust hadn't happened. He was really interested in books about that. I can't remember the stuff now, but I could look it up and find it out. But there were some very significant books that are now notorious for having started some of those movements where they argued that all the stuff, the Holocaust, it never happened. None of those people. I still like to read Philip K. Dick. I'm sorry. H.P. Lovecraft, horrific. He's very similar to Poe in his hatred of blacks. Very racist imagery and passages in his letters. He was a very unhappy man. I'm not apologizing for him. He came up from a really strange background. And the thing I found most interesting in starting to read about Lovecraft is late in his life, he seemed to be changing a little. He seemed to be softening. So that connection that Poe had between blacks and working people and average people, he actually started to support Upton Sinclair just before he died. And I often thought there was something soft. He might have actually started to recognize some of his racism and his stupidity in the way that George Wallace did, George Wallace seemed to learn and adapt to his horrific youth. We talked about Dostoevsky. Anti-Semitic, called anti-Semitic many times, and his history. It brings me all the way around to what I really want, what really kind of set me off to do this piece today, which is the Philip Roth. We've talked about Philip Roth as well. This is one of the few Philip Roth books I really liked. It was sort of set in my old University of Connecticut. I'm pretty sure. It felt like it. And the whole way it was described felt like University of Connecticut. And I liked this book. I thought he was trying to do some interesting things, and I kind of kept reading it. Normally, I don't like Roth. He really likes to write about horrible people and kind of the more disgusting and animalistic and neurotic aspects of human life. Notoriously, he wrote Portnoy's Complaint, which is about masturbation. He's often describing himself and women, particularly in physical love and in ways that he thinks they could have punctured the balloon of any romance, if I could put it that way. So he's a weird writer. I can't get into him. I don't think I'm going to ever quite love him. But the big controversy this past week or so has been the Philip Roth biography. Okay. We talked about this. I think I was saying I've been debating whether I would read it because I did like what I've read by Blake Bailey. I've liked what books I've read of his in the past. I don't know him. I think I've exchanged a couple emails with him because he used me in one of his books. And I have nothing to say except he seemed pleasant when I talked to him, and I have nothing good or bad to say except I liked his work. I was debating reading this. I read some of the reviews around it, and I thought there were some good reviews for it and against it. And I was sort of deciding not to read it when all this new furore started about Blake Bailey himself. And I don't want to go into it because I don't know what's going on exactly. I don't know what's going on. I know that he's been accused by one person of rape, and he's also been accused of grooming. Now I'm putting that as simply as I can. I don't know exactly what happened. They're serious charges. They disturb you. They make you worried about these people who may have suffered from this, and they make you worried about this person, whether he's actually done them or not, or whether he's being mistreated. Maybe these are misrepresentations of what happened. I don't know. I'm not going to get into this. I can't decide. What I find, I don't know. I have no material to decide, but I would be interested in what happens to some extent. Whatever they decide, whatever is decided about what really happened in some of these incidents that have been reported, and whether there are more incidents, and whether it gets worse or it gets better, as some of these cases do. I was really shocked to find out that Norton has now actually erased this book. It's erased from the bookshelf. They've stopped sending it out. The Kindle edition, which I was debating because I don't want to keep this around, it's just too big, and I'm not sure if I'll read it. The Kindle edition has actually been erased from the shelf at Amazon, and this is going to be going out of print probably in the next few days. I guess it's not being sold anymore, and I believe another book of his has been put out of print. Now there's two reasons for this. One is concerns about who he is and whether he should be allowed to publish books or not. I don't think that's something any of us with the history of literature can decide. We can't decide any of that. But there are also issues of what Norton's editors knew and what they passed on, which strike me as pretty disturbing. They're as disturbing as some of the charges against Bailey, that they were actually passing on letters to him from a person accusing him of something. Anyway, I don't want to go into too much of the story. This, when they romanticize all these banned books that exist in the world, for every copy of Catcher in the Rye or To Kill a Mockingbird, these books are all the time. Books are banned every day by publishers because they're not going to make money, because they don't represent the world the way the publishers want the world to be represented. They don't do the biographies of the right person. Roth. If this guy was trying to do a biography of somebody who wasn't very successful or famous, they're not even going to publish it. And so the actual banning of books is occurring every day in our lives. The way they're being done now, I find, is extremely disturbing. The fact that if someone decides they don't want to publish their estate's books, we can't do anything about that. But when bots start to identify and connect books with basically child abuse images, then we got a shitload of problems going on in the world. And the fact that I'm worried is that I think that even we've got such a computer controlled environment right now that even mentioning some of these books, it may cause trouble just disseminating one simple idea, which is writers aren't perfect. Sometimes they're criminals. Sometimes they're awful people. Their books they publish may still be worth reading, whichever one of those people they are. And we can't decide that we don't think other people should read something. I'm afraid. I would like to say nobody should ever read Desaad. I don't see any point in reading Desaad. But at the same time, it's going to happen. And they may learn something from it. And they may be much smarter than me in terms of what they learned from that book. Okay, that's all I have to say. Happy bathing. This goes on too long. I'm sure if I'm annoying people or I'm being too middle of the road, I don't care. All I want to do is just say, we shouldn't be canceling books or rejecting books, from preventing people from reading books, and say we're good people, and then run around blowing our own horn because we read To Kill a Mockingbird to our class. Okay, happy bathing. See you soon.